Social and indigenous organizations from Peru remain mobilized to demand justice for the state repression that has left more than 60 people dead in the country. The summit of the group of 20 foreign ministers and in New Delhi, India, without a consensus on the Ukrainian conflict. France and Burkina Faso have officially marked the end of French military operations in the West African nation. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Ana Marrero from the teleSUR headquarters in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. Stay with us. Socials and indigenous organizations from Peru remain mobilized to demand justice for the state repression that has left more than 60 people dead in the country. On Thursday, citizens from different regions of the country participated in the so-called second takeover of Lima. The activists describe President Dina Boluarte as a murderer and insist that her administration cannot continue to be sustained by violence and the death of the compatriots. The demonstrators requested that other organizations join the actions on the street. At the same time, they demand the resignation of the President Dina Boluarte, the closing of the Congress, and a constituent process.
Look, the citizens of Madre de Dios come to make a peaceful march according to the political constitution, understanding that we disagree with the president who is murdering the population. We cannot ignore this situation, because we have more than 70 dead in the country, and at this moment we are in a crisis. We are living a civil military dictatorship. That is why the citizens of Madre de Dios and an average of 1,000 people are here in Lima. We have been in Lima for 40 days already, making a protest, but that is the result, Mr. Journalist. The police are shooting our brothers without fear of anything, and that makes the population react more, and the mobilizations can be forceful today. It's only the beginning of this indefinite strike.
We would not want to see the faces of the police officers. They are the ones who openly provoke. We are walking peacefully and these gentlemen attack us. That is what I can tell you about it.
The government of Venezuela rejected the extension of the criminal policy of aggression perpetrated by the government of the United States. Through a communique, the executive condemned the continuity of the executive order imposed in 2015, in which Washington declared the South American nation as a threat. In the same context, the government highlighted that with the extension of this nature, the White House once again disrespected the sovereignty and self-determination of the people. Meanwhile, Caracas emphasized that it conducts its international relations under the diplomacy of sovereignty and peace, and therefore it could never be qualified as a threat. The arraignment hearing against Ecuador's former President Lenin Moreno, 6 members of a family and 32 others involved in the impasse case took place on Thursday. According to the Prosecutor General's office, the case renamed Sinohydra is related to a corruption scheme that operated during the building of the Coca-Cola St. Clair hydroelectric project between 2009 and 2018 and carried out by the Chinese company Sinohydro. The judicial entity believes that $76 million were delivered by Sinohydro as revenue and channels through third parties, for which false consulting and representation service were used in exchange for gift checks and wire transfers. The President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, called on Thursday for an economic and commercial alliance against inflation in Latin America. The head of state announced a virtual meeting for April the 5th with his counterpart from Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Cuba, and Honduras to seek exchanges in the import and exports of food and other goods in order to jointly face the high cost of living in Latin America. The Mexican president acknowledged the difficulty of dealing with rising food prices, although he urged that the rise in prices is a worldwide phenomenon that was precipitated after the conflict in Ukraine. On Wednesday, the U.S. intelligence officials revealed that there is no evidence that foreign countries were involved in the accurately known Havana syndrome, but the conclusions were given by the Washington Post diary. TeleSUR in English connected Dr. Michael Valdez, director of the Cuban Neurosciences Institute, who led the research carried out in Havana on the subject, to know his thoughts on these conclusions.
They conclude that there's no new disease, that this is not a new syndrome that is caused by a mysterious energy source. In fact, they conclude that this is basically a collection of different disorders, different diseases. They're real. The people suffer. The U.S. diplomats are suffering because of this. But it's due to environmental causes, and also to pre-existing medical conditions in some cases. It's a mixed bag of different disorders. This conclusion essentially is the same that a few years ago was reached by the Cuban Academy of Sciences. The Cuban Academy of Sciences put together a team of experts from many different fields of science, and after examining all the evidence that had been made publicly available and doing community surveys in the areas where in Cuba the incidents had occurred, they concluded exactly the same. No energy weapon, no attack, and that this was not a new disorder, a new syndrome. And of course, now with thousands of cases reported around the world, and the wide resources that the U.S. intelligence communities have mobilized, I think we're reaching the end of this saga. We know that this is something that has explainable because of mundane causes, normal disorders, and that we're not in the presence of something that's mysterious.
Let's take a very short break now, but remember, you can now follow us on our TikTok account, teleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and more. Stay tuned for more news. Welcome back to From the South. On Thursday, Russian President Vladimir Putin condemned the attack against civilians by Ukrainian troops in the border area and points out that such acts will not be tolerated.
Today, they committed another terrorist act, another crime, penetrated the border area and opened fire on civilians. They saw that it was a civilian car. They saw that civilians and children were sitting there, just an ordinary Niva, and they fired on them. I'm sure that these owners will not remember today's crimes. Nobody will even pay attention to it. But again, I repeat, they will not succeed, we'll get them.
The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed the successful rotation of its team of experts deployed at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the Intergovernmental Organization, declared that the sixth scientific team of the support and assistance mission completed the overdue rotation at the atomic power plant. Grossi confirmed that the IAEA experts will be deployed to 3 other nuclear power plants in Ukraine to assist in the protection of their facilities. From September 2022, the United Nations Nuclear Energy Scientific and Technological Cooperation Agency began sending missions to Zaporizhzhia to implement a nuclear safety zone in the midst of the Ukrainian conflict. German Foreign Minister Olaf Scholz said Germany has trained more than 3,000 Ukrainian soldiers. Scholz made a statement before the Bundestag, the German parliament, in protests in Berlin for a new escalation of the conflict in Ukraine. Scholz announced that another 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers will shortly be arriving in Germany from training. According to the German Foreign Minister, it is impossible to achieve peace in Ukraine through demands to suspend arms supplies. Last week, after registering a buildup of military equipment near the Ukrainian border in the region of Moldova, Moscow warned the United States, NATO, and Ukraine against possible attacks in the region of Transnistria. So Russia goes on alert to prevent its territory from getting attacked. Our colleague from Brazil, de facto Sergei Monin, gave us more details from this information.
The Russian Defense Ministry announced on Wednesday that it avoided an attempted massive drone attack by Ukraine on the Crimean Peninsula, incorporated to Russia since 2014. Earlier this week, a series of drones crashed into Russian regions, even near Moscow, raising the alarm that Ukraine might be counterattacking inside Russian territory.
An attempt by the regime in Kiev has been thwarted. The goal was to launch a massive drone attack on facilities in the Crimean Peninsula. 6 Ukrainian drones were shot down by air defenses. 4 other Ukrainian drones were disabled by electronic warfare. There were no casualties and no destruction of property on the ground.
At the same time as the drone attacks, Russia has been seizing important areas of territory in the Bakhmut region, the current epicenter of the fighting in Ukraine. The government in Kyiv is aware of the difficult scenario for the troops in the city's defense.
The war itself has paradoxically entered into a phase of crisis. The war is going through a crisis. The war is a political instrument as a way of achieving strategic goals. It's no longer justified today. The parties have reached a dead end. They have reached a certain military equilibrium in which a quick or final victory of one of the parties is no longer possible. Therefore, of course, in order to destabilize the internal situation in Russia and to increase the cost for Russia, the Ukraine will try to transfer the war, at least the air war, to the territory of Russia, in order to increase the cost of this war for the Russian society and the Russian leadership.
At the same time, tensions have been rising over the past week in Transnistria, the pro-Russian separatist region of Moldova. After registering an increase in military hardware near Transnistria's border with Ukraine, Moscow accused the West of provocation. The US-based Institute for the Study of War believes it is preparing false flag operations to blame the West. There is a small Russian military presence in the region of Moldova, which maintains a large reserve of ammunition.
As the war in Ukraine is in a crisis phase, it is not possible to achieve political goals through military actions in Ukraine. There is still a great danger that the war will escalate and reach other countries, other regions. I believe that Ukraine can use the situation in Transnistria as an instrument of pressure on Russia. If Russia continues its offensive in Donbas, Ukraine could carry out its military operation in Transnistria, provoking a military defeat for Russia and pro-Russian forces, and have access to ammunition and technology.
Desde Río de Janeiro, Sergei Monin.
Listen English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries through StarSat, dial 461, and join our Latin American alternative broadcast. One final short break, and we'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back. The summit of the group of 20 foreign ministers and in New Delhi, India, without a consensus on the Ukrainian conflict. The meeting of the diplomats of the group of 20 industrialized and developing nations included with several divergences and could not be reconciled, as various parties held different views on the matter. However, Indian Foreign Minister Sahar Naiman Yahkard said that members of the G20 did agree on most issues involving the concern of less developed nations, such as the importance of strengthening multilateralism, promoting food and energy security, climate change, gender issues, and counterterrorism. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said at the press conference after the G20 ministerial meeting in New Delhi that the bloc joint declarations could not be approved because the US tried to focus on the Ukrainian situation and rejected Russia's requests for an investigation into a Nord Stream gas pipeline accident.
The declaration on behalf of all the G20 ministers could not be approved. Our Western colleagues, just like a year ago under the Indonesian presidency, tried by hook or by crook, primarily by crooks and various rhetorical statements, to bring to the fore the problem of the situation around Ukraine. The West insisted on reproducing the text on the situation around Ukraine, which was agreed upon at the G20 summit last year in Bali, completely ignoring our arguments that a lot of events have happened since then, including the sincere confessions of Madam Merkel, Mr. Hollande, Mr. Poroshenko, and even Zelensky himself, that none of them was going to fulfill the Minsk agreements. They also refused in this context to accept another fact that reflects the events that have occurred since then. I mean, the terrorist acts against the gas pipelines in the Nord Stream system. Our call to document the need for a fair and honest investigation was flatly rejected by our Western partners.
On the other hand, the Russian diplomat referred to Moscow's position regarding a peaceful solution to the conflict in Ukraine.
Addressing the calls for negotiations to Russia, which we have never refused, if they are serious, I underline, is incorrect. We haven't seen any serious offers since March last year. There is only military rhetoric, militant decisions that are being made by NATO. In regard to the assistance in resolving the crisis, we have repeatedly said publicly that we never refuse serious proposals that are made out of a sincere desire to find a political solution.
France and Burkina Faso have officially marked the end of French military operations in the West African nation after a flag-lowering ceremony at the French Special Force camp. In January, the Burkina Faso government gave France 1 month to withdraw its troops as it ends a military agreement that allowed French troops to fight insurgents on its territory, citing a wish for the country to defend itself. Their departure marks a new chapter in the West African nation battle with Islamic groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, which have taken over the large sites of land and displaced millions of people in the wider Sahel region just as the south of the Sahara. And we have come to the end of this news brief, but you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on our socials. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram as well. For teleSUR English, I'm from the South, I'm Ana Marrero, and thank you for watching.